All right, after you have your portrait on your final paper, this is where you're going to start working on shading. So this demonstration is just to show you a couple different tricks for shading. After you have your hair kind of mapped out, my suggestion for shading, and a lot of people do it different ways, is to do a combination of lines and filling in the empty space with shadow. So how I like to do it is make sure my shading pencil is really sharpened so I can use the edge of it. And I like to start by shading my hair lightly in the direction of my hair. And every once in a while, I use the tip of my pencil to add in lines. And hair is kind of tricky to shade because you want to fill in the whole space, but really all hair is just lots and lots and lots of lines. If you have curly hair, you want to kind of change the direction of those lines. And then go outside of this outline because your hair doesn't have a solid outline. The other thing you can do is after you're done and have it pretty dark and have a nice shadow in there with lines, you can take the corner of a large eraser and you can lighten up and blend those lines together using the corner of an eraser. And sometimes this allows for some highlights in the hair as well. So I'm going to speed through the rest of this so you can see how I would finish it up. But the last thing I want to say is that make sure you're paying attention to the direction that your hair is going in different parts of your face. So I have my part right here, and my hair goes up and over on this side, but then it goes straight down on that side. Okay, now I'm going to come back to my hair later on, but I'm getting a little tired of working with it, so sometimes it's good to move from one thing to another. So now I'm going to start shading the face, and I'm going to start by shading my darkest areas where I want to make sure that all the focus is on those areas. So I start with the eyes and the nose and the mouth and the eyebrows, and then I'll go in and shade the rest of the face and where I see those highlights and those darker shadows. So you might go back to the video on shading the eye. Remember the one that we did when we practiced shading the eye? Once you have the shape of your eyes, I think it's really helpful to go back to that video to help because you guys were really proud of that eye that you made. So I'm going to do the same shading here in my eyes that I did in my practice one. So I'm going to follow those same steps. But I also am going to look at my reference image as I work because that's important to make sure that my shading is matching my reference image as well. So another thing you can do is zoom into your eye to work on that. So I will speed through my shading of my eye. Now, so far I've been shading with my shading pencil, but sometimes that shading pencil is too dark and too soft for our lighter shadows. So one thing we want to make sure is we can go back to our regular number 2 pencil to add the shading in places where we want really, really light shadows. So I want a little bit lighter of a shadow to show this overlap onto the eyeball to make the eyeball look more rounded. So I'm just going to use my light pencil, my number 2 pencil, to add a little bit of shadow in there, just to make my eyeball look more rounded. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shade the nose. And the nose can be really tricky because a lot of the nose is just shading. So, and not a lot of lines. So one thing that you're going to shade on your nose, and if you look, make sure you have your reference image as well. There's also a detailed video on how to do this, different ways to do this. But one thing you're going to shade is you want it to look like there's the bulb of your nose. So you might start by using the side of your pencil and just kind of adding the bulb of your nose in. The parentheses that we've been talking about for your nostrils are pretty significant solid lines, but you can soften those lines up by shading kind of on the side of your nostril and down below. There's a pretty significant line to show the edge of your nose, and then inside your nostrils there will be a shadow. And then your nose will also have, if you look at your image, I'm just going to go right on top of my glasses here. I'll erase what I need to later. A pretty significant shadow up the side of your nose as well. I'm just going to use my finger to blend and smooth a little bit. Then I'm going to use my eraser to make sure that I keep those highlights. Your nose sticks out pretty far off your face, so you'll want the bulb of your nose to be light to show that. So where my glasses are, I'm just going to erase the shading so it looks like it's overlapping. I'm going to go ahead and speed through shading my glasses next. But before I do that, I'll talk about the eyebrows a little bit. Your eyebrows are all also just like your hair. So I'm just going to use a series of lines, figure out the direction that my eyebrows go in. They don't have an outline to them, so I want to make sure that my drawing doesn't have an outline around my eyebrows. Okay, the next thing I'm going to shade is my lips and kind of around my chin, things like that. So I'm going to use a lighter pencil just because we don't really have a solid line around our lips unless we're wearing lip liner. So a lot of the lips is going to be shading. Excuse me. So I'm just going to start by shading a really light value on my top lip. And what I like to do is just start shading following the contour of my lip. And the contour of your lip is how to make it look more three-dimensional. So by adding a little bit of shading going in that direction that your lip is, as if it was a rounded object or a three-dimensional object, I think is really important. Same with the bottom. The bottom lip has these lines and these contours. So if you want to make your lip more three-dimensional, shading in that direction is really helpful. It also will get a little bit darker as it goes towards that crease, and that crease is going to be the darkest part of your lip. And make sure that crease goes out a little bit farther than the lip line. I don't mind the texture in my drawings. I blend just a little bit, but there is a problem with overblending where it will become too smooth. Your lips also have a lot of highlights. Usually there's a highlight on the bottom where it sticks out here and the light hits it. Usually there's a highlight kind of in the center here. And I like to blend my lips with my eraser just because it lightens and blends that shading in a little bit more. So I'm going to continue working on that, but I wanted to talk about there's lots of shadow underneath your nose. And you have that little crease right here that's usually a shape of some kind. So you want to look, I'm looking at this right here, this picture, and trying to map in where I see those shadows. There's also shading around kind of the edges of my lips to show that I'm smiling. And there's also some shading here to show that curve of my chin. And my image has shadow on this side of my face. So I'm going to start adding that in using just the edge of my number 2 pencil. My cheek is rounded, so I can show that through my shading, and there's lines down to my lips. There's a misconception that you have to shade the entire face. I really don't believe that's true in many cases. Personally, I like to keep some white blank spaces when I'm shading, but that's a personal preference for me. So I'm going to start shading around the eyes a little bit because I have dark shadows underneath my eyes. And being able to see these shadows also takes practice. And above my eyes. So I'm going to add those in. Now, you might have to go back and lighten up some spots with your eraser. As you work. And you might also have to go back and darken up some spaces. Maybe you've lost like your eye outline, or maybe you want to darken up and create more contrast in your shading. So every once in a while I like to take a step back from my project and look at it from far away and see if you can still see my shading. So when I step away, what I notice is that I can still see my details and my dark spaces. So I know I don't need to darken those up anymore. The last part that I'm going to show you how to work with is your neck, because you don't want to forget about that. I'm going to map in the clothing that I'm wearing, because I think that'll help. And then you usually will see a shadow where your chin overlaps your neck, so you want to add that in. And that'll help define kind of the edge of your face too. And then you'll see shadow where your clothing overlaps your body. And you might see a little shadow around your neck, like where, if you have like an Adam's apple or a dent, I don't know what you call it, where your clavicle is, right? Right here. So those are things you want to notice and add in as you work. So this is in progress. I'm continuing to work on it, but I wanted to make sure that I helped you guys with some shading for your final if you're interested in working on that. Oh, the last thing I'm realizing looking at this now is I need to add in some shading on my forehead, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Notice I'm not super careful with my shading because I kind of like it to have texture and to look handmade.